able to interact with you guys. You guys know that I manage, or my responsibilities, I'm 85 extension, 15% teaching. So basically that's outreach, excuse me, for you all. And I primarily work in winter wheat, which I know the audience there, you guys work in a range of systems. So if there's some other things that come up when we're done, we can discuss, but primarily my background and what I do for OSU is in small grains. So I'll talk a little bit about broadleaf weed management, and then I'll move into some of the grass weed management as well. I'll start with horseweed or mare's tail. No surprise that most of our populations that we have in Oklahoma are glyphosate resistant. So here's kind of a textbook example of making an application. This was trying to be a harvest aid kind of rescue application. When you have that dead plant right next to a living plant, typically that's a sign, if your application went out successfully and you didn't have any sprayer issues, that could be a sign of herbicide resistance. And with horseweed, many of our populations in the state are resistant to both glyphosate and our group 2 herbicides, products like Ally or metsulfuron. This was just a little harvest aid study that we did in Tipton and Stillwater, looking at, well, once we do have that horseweed in our wheat, is there anything that we can do to burn it down in order to prepare for harvest? So not really a weed control management tool that's ideal, but again, more of a rescue treatment. And you can see that not many of these treatments weren't that effective. We have several below 50% control. In Stillwater, our horseweed population wasn't 100% resistant to glyphosate. And so we were able to pick up a little bit of control. But really the best time is to control horseweed or mare's tail is when they look like this. When they're overwintering, we have these rosettes. We can have these rosettes in the fall. They can be coming up shortly, or we can have some rosettes come up in the spring. So in Oklahoma, horseweed really has 2 different life cycles. It can be a biennial, or it can act a little bit more like a summer annual. So I had a student look at some of these treatments when we target those rosettes on horseweed. And basically we were trying to find out some of our newer products like Culex and Centralis. How did those chemistries compare to some of our older products, like just going out with 2,4-D alone, or dicamba, MCPA, or finesse, some of those chemistries that you're probably pretty familiar with. And in a take-home message, what we learned from looking at that for a couple of years over several sites in Oklahoma was we can get away with an application of 2,4-D or dicamba alone, but we really need to be in the 2 to 3 inch rosette stage. So even if you have some pasture ground, I would say that would be the same rule of thumb. We can get away with those synthetic auxins, but they have to be small. One of our old area agronomists, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with, Heath Sanders, used to always say, think about if you turned your credit card to the side, that's about 2 to 3 inches. And so that's really when we're talking about plant height or rosette stage where it's flat on the ground like this, we really, once we get out of that several inch stage, lots of times we're going to have to invest in another active ingredient. So when we were larger, which we know field conditions happen, it gets too wet, we have a lot of ground to cover, we can't get in right away. The addition of another herbicide like Culex was very effective. So that's an FMC product. It's new within the last 5, 6, 7 years. And Centralis it's a Corteva product. Centralis is the FMC product, and it also is very effective. It's just a little bit more as far as cost per acreage. So QLEX for the product is going to be about $5 per acre, which is expensive, and you can get away with a cheaper treatment, but it has to be that smaller plant size. And I didn't say early on, I know we're not all sitting in the same room, but I hope you know that this is informal and we can break out into discussions. If you have questions at any time, just let me know. I'll also say that horseweed is going to respond better to a product like dicamba than 2,4-D or MCPA. Those products do a better job, MCPA and 2,4-D, on many of our true winter annuals. But once we have a species that acts a little bit more like a summer annual, dicamba is typically going to do a little bit better of a job. Looking at some other mustards, this was in Jackson County, but I think this is still relevant information to most of our state. So that QLEX plus MCPA treatment that we really liked on horseweed. Let me move my camera. Still doing a good job on broadleafs like bushy wallflower, henbit. However, when we moved into other broadleafs like pepperweed, we have Virginia pepperweed in Oklahoma and greenleaf pepperweed. Finesse plus MCPA was still, a pretty good treatment. So you can see that here. I know folks like that tank mix for broadleafs, and it is still doing a good job where we don't have horseweed that is resistant to ALS herbicides. And Finesse is that ALS. And same thing with Ally and Glean, the two active ingredients that make up that product. I get some questions as well on cutleaf evening primrose. So this is what that plant looks like. Maybe you've seen it before. It has a fairly thick cuticle, so it can be difficult to get herbicides to properly translocate into that, across that cuticular membrane. Some of the same treatments that you've been seeing on the previous slides. I'm going to minimize this. QLEX plus several of our tank mix partners like 2,4-D and MCPA still cleaning up that product. I would say Finesse is a chemistry that is still working on this weed as well. So if you've liked Finesse plus 2,4-D or MCPA, I would say still working on primrose. If you need to invest in QLEX because you have horseweed problems, then this is probably going to pick up your primrose as well. And then I'll just mention something about the QLEX label that folks like. Yes, you might be paying a little bit more than a 2,4-D or dicamba. However, some of the plant back restrictions look a little bit better if you compare to tank mixing with something like Finesse. If you replace your Finesse with QLEX, you're going to have shorter rotation intervals if you're going to summer crops. So if you look at corn, cotton, soybean, sunflower, you're looking at a 3-month rotation interval. Typically, you're going to apply this in early spring in your wheat. So you'll have enough time to get a summer crop in. And then I'll also mention down here at the bottom that if you're in no-till production, you can even get away with an interval as short as 45 days, which there are several folks that might terminate or utilize that shorter rotation interval. So something attractive if you're going to invest a couple of extra dollars per acre for the product. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about some of our grasses. Any questions on the broadleafs that were discussed or other things that are on your mind before I shift gears to grass weed control?
Finesse, isn't that a pre-emerge?
Finesse?
Yeah.
It does have some pre-emergence activity, but it also has post-emergence activity. So it can move in the living tissue of plants that are growing, and it can have some residual as well.
Okay. And
yeah, go ahead.
Residual, is that for broadleaves or grasses?
We're going to talk about Zidua. Zidua is only from a pre-emergence application standpoint. It does not have any post-emergence activity. So really the main reason why you would apply Zidua would be if you have Italian ryegrass issues. It can suppress some of these bromes that are on the screen right now, but really it's a ryegrass product. And I think the last several slides I have are on ryegrass control.
No, I meant on finesse. Is that for the residual that's left over on finesse for pre-emergent? Is that broadleaves or is that anything?
Yeah, good question. So many of our small seeded plants, so it can't, well, before we had widespread finesse resistance, it was probably picking up some plants like ryegrass and some of our small seeded broadleaves. Once you have a larger seeded plant, it's probably not going to be as effective.
Okay. And then is there any, like if you got a lot of cover left on from doing cover crops and stuff, so if you still have a lot of cover, but yet you still have, does that affect the chemical when you apply it at all? I mean, if there's not much, I mean, of course, if the weeds are above the cover, then it would
yeah. Are you thinking more from a pre-emergent standpoint in having residue?
Yeah, probably so.
So we've actually been doing a little bit of work on that. This is our third year. We have a study with Jason Warren, who I'm sure you guys all know in soil and water conservation. And basically what we're seeing is if we have cover, whether we're calling it true no-till, where close to 100% of our ground is covered with biomass, or we're more in a conservation, some of that ground is covered. So far, what we're seeing is if we're applying our product at 15 gallons per acre, we're able to get enough contact with our soil that we're not seeing decreases in weed control. Now, I don't know the answer to that question if you're applying at a carrier volume of 5-10 gallons per acre. So I would say in those high coverage situations, I would make sure your carrier volume's around 15 GPA.
Okay.
And then if it is a pre-emergence, of course, you then need to incorporate it. So you're gonna want a rain to follow your application shortly. So I would say if it's a pre, that rain and getting it incorporated is going to be a lot more important than how much cover you have on the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Any other questions before we talk about grasses? I know, or if I remember correctly, I know some of you graze your wheat, so I know maybe not all of you are going to be interested on the grass weed control side, but I think that there were at least some of you still.
Any questions? I think they're good now.
We're good. Keep going. Okay. So grass weed control, which is, on the quality side, something that I spend some time in. Grass weeds, of course, can be difficult to identify when we're at the seedling stage. I always encourage producers to scout fields and look at these plants when they're headed out. So if you weren't happy with the level of grass weed management you had in your wheat last year, trying to figure out what grasses you have, or at harvest this year, take a really close look, send some pictures, and let's find out what they are, because typically we like to call these bromes cheat grass, and really they all are in the same family. They're closely related. They're in the bromus genus, but they are different species, and so they respond differently to herbicides. I put these two plants up on the same screen together. They respond to herbicides in, I would say they do a pretty good job at responding. We can clean up these plants relatively well. So we have downy brome on the left. It's probably the hairiest brome that we see. To me, it's more of a roadside weed than I see in wheat fields. But when we have maybe wheat that hasn't been really cared for as far as fertility, you could see this plant move in. Japanese brome is on your right. Once it dries down, something that's unique about it is its awns are typically bent. And so that can be one way to distinguish it, and it's not as hairy as downy brome. It also has a really loose panicle. So if you were holding that plant in your hand, you would see it kind of flop over because of this loose structure that it has. It's not as tight as this downy brome plant looks on the left. So those two I don't worry about as much. These plants I have a lot of issues with in the state of Oklahoma. So we have true cheat on the left. Typically, this is going to be one of the taller bromes. We see it grow up above our wheat crop. And we do have true cheat plants in Oklahoma that are resistant to all of our ALS herbicides. So Powerflex, Outrider, Beyond, Finesse, any of our ALS, which are our group 2s, this plant we can no longer kill. So unfortunately, sometimes I get calls in the spring and I'll get pictures of this plant in wheat. And they'll ask me what they can spray. And basically I have to say there are no options. And that's a really hard thing to say. And it's not fun to say. So just keep in mind this plant, as resistance can possibly start to move south and west, could be something that comes up. The other grass that you've probably seen, this is rescue grass. It's also a brome. We don't have any documented herbicide resistance to this plant, but unfortunately, it's just one of those plants that doesn't respond well to herbicide, so it can be very difficult to clean up. This was a rescue grass study that's been several years performed at Tipton by Gary Strickland. Tipton, that research site happens to be one that has a lot of rescue grass. And I know that there's a lot going on as far as products sprayed. You just want to draw your attention towards the middle of the screen. You can see that the only herbicide systems that we're offering in that 90% control range really were when we sprayed Beyond. So that would be investing in Clearfield wheat and spraying the Beyond herbicide either in the fall or doing a fall and spring sequential treatment. When we wanted to plant a conventional wheat and maybe not invest in Clearfield and spray something like Powerflex or Outrider, We could get control into the 70s, high 70s with these products, but we absolutely have to apply in the fall if we have rescue grass and we want to use a conventional chemistry like PowerFlex or Outrider. If we wait till the spring with one of these products, you can see we're not getting anything more than 40% control with PowerFlex. And that herbicide is $12 per acre for just the product. So really, from an investment standpoint, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. I do also want to mention coaxium wheat. This would be another herbicide option to clean up plants like rescue grass that just don't respond well. This is one herbicide that works well on rescue grass and other plants like feral rye. Most of our grasses, this chemistry can clean up. So this technology, if you're not familiar, was introduced. Let's see, this is our 6th year of doing research at OSU. Only in the last couple years has it been available to the public. This is coaxium wheat. So if you're looking at wheat varieties and they end in X, AX, those are our coaxium wheat varieties. What does that mean? This is another herbicide tolerant wheat. This is the second herbicide tolerant wheat system that we've had. So we've had Clearfield that we could spray Beyond on for a couple decades now. And this is kind of the competing technology. So the system is called coaxium. The trait is called Axygen, and the herbicide is called Aggressor. It's not a new herbicide, but it is a new herbicide that we can spray over the top of wheat. Quizalofop is the active ingredient. So if you've ever sprayed a product called Assure 2, that is also Quizalofop. Maybe you've sprayed it in a broadleaf crop. It's a group 1 herbicide or ACCase inhibitor, which means it kills grasses. So it's in the same family as Select, Post, maybe you sprayed Select as clethodim off patent. Those are all the same group of herbicides. They act very similar, and what they do is they kill grasses once they've emerged. So we've been looking at this technology. This, of course, is again, it tipped in with our rescue grass infested wheat fields. And you can see that this technology did a really good job. This isn't a very interesting slide to look at, but from a rescue grass control perspective, this is great. We had almost 100% control with all of our treatments. And we had different combinations of rates, fall application, spring application, fall followed by spring, and then also different adjuvants, playing around with non-ionic surfactants and methylated seed oils. So no matter what we did, we were able to control rescue grass. And I know Gary was really impressed with this because he's been having a heck of a time controlling some of their populations in Southwest Oklahoma. So from a controls perspective, this is good news. Here's just a visual of what some of these treatments looked like. You can see our rescue grass plants in the middle of our wheat rows, and then clean treatments. Now you can see we have some mustards. That's good to keep in mind. Quizalofop or Aggressor has no activity on broadleaf weeds, and so you will have to tank mix with a broadleaf herbicide. So just to keep that in mind. Talking about that technology, another that coaxium system is also going to be very effective on feral rye. Feral rye, another plant where we don't have documented herbicide resistance in Oklahoma. It's just one of those plants, again, that unfortunately doesn't respond well to our herbicides. So coaxium wheat doing a good job cleaning up this plant. And I would also say if you are someone who has invested in Clearfield systems, that I would say Clearfield systems, when we do a fall and spring application, if you're still having success with that system to pick up feral rye, I think that's still an option. One limitation that this technology has is because it's fairly new, variety selection isn't there for everyone. Dr. Carver is working on getting this trait integrated into OSU germplasm, kind of similar to his release of double stop with that Clearfield trait. Our goal is to have an OSU line that is in the coaxium system. Unfortunately, those breeding cycles, as you guys know, take time. And so it's going to be several years before we have maybe a variety that you like that's really adapted to your area. But I would still say there's a lot of growers that have decided, I want to clean up the rye, I want to clean up the rescue grass, I don't want to wait for maybe the perfect variety, and I'm going to go ahead and invest in the system. They have priced it just below the Clearfield system, so you are paying for that herbicide tolerant trait. You do have to sign that agreement when you purchase your seed that you can't save the seed because it has a trait, and all of that, which maybe you've been familiar with if you've planted Clearfield wheat. So I first talk about the good news of coaxium, and then I want to talk about some news, which I guess I would call this, I would call this bad news, something to be careful about if you do make aggressor applications in your wheat. So this is some work that we're doing with Colorado State University in Nebraska, just looking at different feral rye densities. So this would be no feral rye up to a really high population of feral rye and different applications of aggressor. So if we make an application in the fall, control looks pretty good. Our yield looks pretty good, regardless of our treatment. We get into early spring, you start to see a little bit of a decline in yield. This is crop response. So this is actually us having some crop injury from our aggressor herbicide treatment. And then in late spring, severe crop injury. So if this is a system that you're thinking about using, I would just caution you of your spring application. If you look at the aggressor herbicide label, it will tell you you cannot make an application once wheat is jointing. So once we get to stem elongation, about the time we would pull cattle off, you now can feel that first node detectable above the soil surface. That is a time where we could start having some injury issues in our wheat if we use this product. So I feel more comfortable with our fall treatments, or even a fall followed by an early spring at our lower rate of 8 ounces. But once we start getting into these higher rates of 10, 12 fluid ounces, and we can detect a node, we could have some issues. And I have received several complaints from growers across the state. When you have invested a decent amount of money in the seed and the herbicide, this is not something that you're going to want to see. And so I think it's important that I just tell folks that this could be a potential issue if you invest in this technology. Any questions? I'm going to end with Italian ryegrass control. Any questions on any of the bromes or feral rye?
I'm good. Oh, I think they're good.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about Italian ryegrass. I'd say this information as far as resistance is important to your county. that we have documented group 1 or ACCase resistance to panoxidine, which is Axial XL. Now also being sold as Axial Bold. So a product that we liked to use to clean up Italian ryegrass and wheat. Typically we would apply it in the spring. We're seeing full-blown resistance. And this product at $16 per acre is not something you want to spray and then see 0% control. So here's where we have documented resistance. I'm sure we have more than this in the state of Oklahoma, but these are where we've had proactive educators send samples in, like in your area, and we really appreciate that, that we're able to document some of these populations. So if you do have ryegrass on the post-emergent side, basically this is a lot of not so great news. This is Axial, PowerFlex, this is Finesse, this would be Glean, Beyond. All of our active ingredients that could once control Italian ryegrass once it's emerged no longer work in those counties that you just saw documented. So that really leaves only one application timing for us to control Italian ryegrass, and that would be at the delayed pre-emergence timing. So that would be right after the wheat has come up, and you can see that spike. You're happy with your stand, you have germination, you can see your plants. These are some products that we can apply. So this would be Axiom, and this would be pyroxasulfone, which is sold in the trade name Zidua, and also Anthem Flex. So this is what some of the control looks like. This particular study didn't have Anthem Flex in it, but you could replace Zidua with Anthem Flex. They're very similar products. Anthem Flex is a little bit cheaper than Zidua by a couple of dollars per acre. And so that's why some folks are going to pick the Anthem Flex over the Zidua. But when we were able to get these products out, these delayed pre's, shortly after planting, and we had an incorporating rain, we did have pretty good weed control, up close to 90% or even above with Zidua. Axial alone, this isn't the greatest example because this was at one of our Perkins sites in Oklahoma where we don't have resistance. So you're going to get very different claims on how Axial might be working on ryegrass. Around you all, you could have someone report 0% control. In maybe a neighboring field where they haven't applied this product in the past, they could get a decent level of control. But because we just maybe don't know, I really recommend sticking with these delayed pre-emergence applications. So that would be, again, the Zidua, Anthem Flex, or the Axiom. I get some frustration with these products because the application timing is so tight. It's right after the plant comes up. Once your ryegrass emerges, it's really too late for the herbicide to do its job properly because it is a pre-emergence. So it's a tight window, and then you need a rain to follow. You need all these things to happen in order for it to work effectively. So in years when it works really well, folks typically tell me they love this product, but if we get caught in a dry fall at planting, then we're not going to be very happy. Now, I will say that there are aerial applications, if that's something that interests you. When we have those tight application windows, we can go out with these products aerially. The only thing that can be challenging is coverage, which we've talked about earlier with ground cover. Well, now you have a plane and you don't have the boom as close to the ground as a ground rig. So you can have some challenges with herbicide to soil contact. So I just keep that in mind with some of those aerial applications. Yes, we're also applying with a lower carrier volume, by playing 2 gallons per acre, maybe 5 if the applicator is able to go out that high. I'll go back one slide. I have on this slide also some tank mixes with metribuzin. Metribuzin is a group, a photosystem 2 inhibitor. It's a group 5. It also is a product that we have tank mixed with a herbicide like Zidua, and we have seen some success. However, with metribuzin, we can see injury. So it is one of those products where it can be very, it can injure our wheat quite a bit depending on the variety that we have planted. If you look at a metribuzin label, it will guide you as to these wheat varieties are very susceptible and we can have injury. These wheat varieties are very tolerant. Unfortunately, when you look at that list, the varieties that are on the list aren't varieties we plant anymore. And so we're trying to find out. I have a graduate student who's just finishing up, and he's trying to get some more recent variety information for our state. And then here's just a picture of that. This is a skip in our drill pass, and you can see in the background, this is a non-treated, it's completely filled with Italian ryegrass, and this is where we had that pyroxasulfone, so Zidua or Anthem Flex, and it's clean. So again, it does a good job, but it needs to go out at the right time, and you have to have an incorporating rain. So some of our take-home messages on our broadleafs in wheat, many of our synthetic auxins like 2,4-D, dicamba, MCPA, they're still doing a good job when we are in that 1 to 3 inch, 1 to 4 inch weed size. Once we start getting larger than that, we probably have to tank mix with another herbicide. Typically it is an ALS, like a Finesse, like an Ally, like a QLEX. Those are all options once we get out of that ideal timing. Horseweed is going to be one where Finesse just isn't going to do as good as a job as it once did because of some resistance issues that we have. In those places, I would replace with QLEX. For our bromes, many of our bromes that emerge early, like rescue grass, we need a target control in the fall. So we can't wait and make a herbicide application in the spring when we top dress. We need to go out earlier if we want to manage our brome species. I would also recommend adding in for many of our products that require an adjuvant like NIS, also adding in some UAN as well. That can also heat up some of our herbicide mixtures. The coaxium technology, it is not a tool for Italian ryegrass that are resistant to group 1 herbicides. And you guys saw some of those counties where we have issues. However, it could be a tool if you have difficult to control herbicide tolerant weeds like rescue grass, true cheat, and feral rye, and you don't want to rotate out of wheat. So we know, no surprise, anyone who's worked in any kind of agronomic system knows that when we rotate our crops, our weeds adapt to our new cropping systems. And so when we rotate out of a winter grass, our winter annual weeds don't become as much of a problem. If we plant a winter broadleaf like canola, we can spray new herbicides to clean up those grasses. But even going to a spring summer crop can be incredibly effective to clean up these winter grasses. So Rotation, I always recommend as a strategy. However, I do now understand, especially now after being in the state for several years, that one way that we diversify our wheat in Oklahoma is with our animals. And so we're not always diversifying by rotating out of winter wheat. And that is one reason why we have so many winter annual grass problems. For Italian ryegrass, I would still recommend those delayed pre's, Anthem, Flex, Zidua, Axiom. And then just another mention about that group 1 resistance of Italian ryegrass, that we cannot use aggressor or axial. So those are some of the take-home messages. This is my contact information, my office phone number, but it goes straight to my cell phone number. If you're on Twitter, you can always message me there. You can message me on email, lots of ways to contact me. And if you have any questions outside of some of the systems, I know many of the systems I do research in aren't always completely aligned with this audience, and I apologize for that. If there are any other questions you guys have, I'd be more than happy to try and answer.
I have a question. I was over in
Yes.
Colorado County yesterday, and there's an area there along Highway 152 where vines are just covering the bar ditch and up on the fences on both sides of the highway. Do you have any idea what kind of vine, or could that be that kudzu? Is there any of that in Oklahoma?
Mm-hmm.
It's a vining plant.
Yes.
I guess what comes to mind right away, I heard you guys say kudzu. I'm thinking I don't know if you can get closer to these plants and see if they have a very coarse kind of rough leaf. I'm thinking it might be something in the gourd family, and the common name is escaping me right now. But if you can look at those plants next time and they have a fairly large leaf and it's very rough, it's probably something in the gourd family. I see those creeping in the ditches, and I would say around where you guys are would make sense.
I mean, it doesn't look like the gourds, what I call gourds. I mean, these are vines, you know, they were really aggressive.
Huh.
Covering the bar ditch and covering the fences on both sides of the highway.
Okay, so okay, yeah, I'm sure if you don't think it was a gourd, it must have been something else. Wonder if you guys can get a picture in and we can try and ID it. Trying to think outside of what other vines I see in the ditches. I don't know, did it have a fairly large leaf?
I was going down the road 60 miles an hour.
Yeah. So it probably did if you noticed it that much. Well, if you guys can get a picture in, and I don't know off the top of my head, but if we ever, I will put a plug in. Dennis Martin, who is our turf grass specialist, he also has a partial appointment with Oklahoma State Department of Transportation, and he also answers all of our roadside questions. And so if you ever need kind of someone who's updated, who's doing research on roadside weed control and have some questions, I would say he's a very good contact that we can be utilizing. I don't know off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
What was his name?
Yeah. Dennis Martin. And I always warn people of this. I say this in the nicest way. Dennis is very smart. And usually when I ask him a question, he replies back to me without the whole page of information. And I I usually have to kind of read through it all and get the recommendation at the end. So just know you will get a lot of information, but he definitely knows what he's talking about, and is a very good researcher.
On that week that you do the post pre-emerge on, or the delayed pre-emerge.
Yeah.
When was that planted? I mean, what's the, because, you know, a lot of times because I don't graze it a lot, I usually just go for the grain. So I don't,
Mhm.
sometimes November, December.
Mhm. Mhm.
When was, is it in the September, October timeframe or?
Most of our stuff, and of course we're a little bit, further north than you, but most of our stuff is going to be grain only as well. And I'm typically planning mid-October, sometimes into November.
Okay.
So I would say those treatments are effective for you, even if you're planting later for grain only. That is fine. You just have to be looking for that rain following application. That's really the only requirement. Soil temperature, planting late, it's getting cooler. None of those things I would worry about. It's just that incorporating rainfall that you need.
So when does Italian ryegrass typically germinate?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're doing a little bit of research on that. So it is a winter annual, which so it does like cooler temperatures. My best examples are, if I'm every once in a while, I'll be caught in that warmer fall where, we're planting in October, but we still have some of those days in the 70s. Typically my ryegrass populations, air temperature, typically my ryegrass populations they're not really coming up yet. Once we start to cool down, those nighttime lows come in, you'll start to see your ryegrass do a flush. Now, the good thing about the delayed pre's is if you can get them incorporated after you apply, they can manage more than one flush. So they're going to get your fall flushes, and they're even going to go after your spring flush. So that's the really attractive thing about that chemistry, is the ability for it to hang out in the soil and control many ryegrass flushes if you can get that first rainfall to move it in the soil profile.
How soon do you need the rainfall after you spray?
So you really need, I would say, so I guess the best way to say it, and I will give you a day range, you don't want your Italian ryegrass to be up. So if you plant and you have good moisture and your wheat germinates, but you also have enough shallow moisture that your Italian ryegrass is also germinating, and you don't have an incorporating rain, that's going to be a problem because your herbicide is up on your soil surface and you have plants below that are germinating. If you're planting into moisture, but you're fairly dry and your ryegrass isn't sitting in moisture, then you're going to have a larger window. So I would really like to be incorporated within like 7-10 days. Much longer than that, unless you're really dry on top and no weeds are germinating until that rain comes. That would be kind of the unique case where you could wait a little bit longer. But I would really like to see a rain, within that week, ideally. And if it's the next day, that's fine too. The sooner the better.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions? All right, Dr. Misha, I think that's all they had.
Okay, well, there's my contact information. I appreciate you guys listening, and anything comes to mind throughout the season or in any other crops. I know we have Todd Bauman, he's an Ardmore. He's our summer crop weed specialist, and I'd be happy to get you in contact with the right people. So just let me know. And thank you for having me again.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.